Hi there, and welcome to this painting tutorial. In this video we will be taking our previous Ultramarine Stage 2 model and upgrading the paint job to Stage 3. This is a quick guide focusing primarily on the armour. This tutorial will be focusing on painting the knee, which is a round shape, and the leg panel, which is a straight shape. And from these two armour shapes you can then apply this to the whole model. The general rule for the armour shapes are: round would be helmet, knee, foot, shoulder pad and the backpack vents. And for the straight would be leg panels front and back, arms, hands, elbows, backpack and some parts of the shoulder pad. With the majority of the model I like to start darkening down the existing paint job. I do this by using glazes of Vallejo model colour black. It really doesn't take long to darken the section down, and on this knee pad I'm just focusing on the lower parts of the curved shape. I also darkened the legs at the same time whilst I was doing the knee, and now I'm just using the base colour of Macragge blue, and I'm using very small thin lines starting from the black and pushing the pigment where I want the light to be, and by using these very thin lines I find it creates a nice transition. Now that I've darkened most of the parts, I start mapping where I want the highlights, and for this I'm going to be using Altdorf Guard blue, and for the knee I create a circular highlights where I want the light to catch, and for the leg panel I use straight lines down the middle. For the knee I start stippling the highlight colour, and as you can see it's looking quite patchy at the moment. This does take a few passes to achieve nice coverage. Whilst waiting for the centre highlights to dry, I start stippling the base colour at the edge of the highlight. Stippling, or as I call it tippy tapping, is where you create small dots in a bouncing motion, very much like a sewing machine. I'm going back from the base colour to the highlight, back and forth to help break up any solid lines and create a nice transition. This is the main method of painting any round parts on the Space Marine. I start trying to create some transition between the highlight and the shadow. I'm creating small thin lines from the shadows towards the highlight colour. I'm allowing these lines to overlap each colour, making sure that the lines are all different lengths. I'm not going for a uniform line here. This painting method is very back and forth. I'm constantly adding to the highlight strength and the width, whilst adjusting the shadow size and trying to maintain a nice smoothish blend. For the purpose of this tutorial, I've rushed a lot of it just to showcase the method. With more time you can create really nice blends if you're just using very simple thin lines. The general rule is that if I'm pulling towards the shadow, I'm trying to create a darker transition, and if I'm pulling towards the highlight, I'm trying to create a lighter transition. On the knee pad I'm going to add some Calgar blue into the highlight area. This is also the extreme highlight colour. I'm just stippling it in, trying to create a nice transition. I also add some Calgar blue into the middle section of the leg panel using very thin straight lines. As you can see, it's created quite a stark highlight down the middle. This will need blending of Altdorf blue and Macragge blue to help smooth this transition out. I also try to fix up any mistakes as I go along. At this moment I'm trying to make sure that the recesses do stay nice and dark. I've added this clip to highlight the struggle of creating a nice transition. I am now trying to refine the highlights, and I'm using Altdorf blue, and I'm starting within the highlights and I'm pulling the lines down into the darker colours. I take a little look at the leg panel and I'm not happy with what I'm seeing, so now I'm going to go back and forth adding extreme highlights of the Calgar blue and the mid-tone of Altdorf blue until I achieve the desired effect. In the end I opt to increase the width of the Calgar blue. Although this is not perfect, I decide to move on to the next stage. When painting the hands, I'm going to be using the straight line technique as on the leg. Unlike the legs, I start mapping the highlights before darkening it. I use Calgar blue to pick out the parts I want to shine. I placed the shadows in a thinned down Vallejo model colour black glaze, focusing on the furthermost top parts and also the bottom. This helps create a nice contrast on the miniature. I then start softening the transition with lines of Macragge blue overlapping the highlight and the shadow colour. With painting the helmet, I start with the darkening using the glaze of Vallejo model colour black. I want the far side of the helmet to remain really dark, while having the forward facing section to have the only highlight. I'm not being very neat during this section because there will be going lots of back and forth. Now that the helmet has its initial darkening, I place the highlight of Altdorf blue where I want the light to catch it. When placing my highlights, especially for these tutorials, I paint with the light source coming straight at the model. For this I look where my light is causing reflections on the paint, and I use this as my guide. Also, I haven't mentioned about the extreme edge highlights from the previous video. I do glaze over most of these using either Altdorf blue if it's in a highlighted area, or Macragge blue if it's in one of those shadowy areas. With painting the highlight on the helmet, I'm tippy-tapping Altdorf blue, trying to let it overlap onto the base colour. I'm now trying to attempt to smooth out the highlights, letting some of the Macragge blue overlap some of the edge highlight. This is important not to have uniform lines during this stage. We want to break up any of those hard edges of colour. Now I add the extreme highlight of Calgar into the parts I want the most shiniest. Whilst that's drying, I'm starting to tidy up the transitions. This may seem quite sporadic, painting multiple parts within different colours at the same time, but I do hate waiting for paint to dry, so I like to keep myself occupied to minimise downtime whilst I'm painting. I place a small highlight under the lens using Calgar blue. This is just to create a point of interest. I also add another coat onto the helm's highlight. I wasn't happy with the side of the helmet being so dark, so I added some more Macragge blue, pulling from the highlights and into the shadowy area. Here I'm just doing more touch-ups on the Calgar extreme highlight. Sorry for the change of lighting in this part. This was painted in the morning and I didn't need as much light. This is actually more a realistic representation of how the model colours look, and I added this clip because I just love painting this part of the Space Marine backpack. It just shows how easy and little work is required to get a really cool effect. I start with the highlights and I'm looking where I want the light to hit the backpack. I also start adding the shadows. Once again, whilst waiting for paint to dry, you can see I've already achieved a nice highlight that has occurred across the top of the backpack, and that is just from adding Calgar blue at the right spot. I'm now adding Macragge blue to soften up the edges of the highlight, starting in the highlight colour going towards the shadow. Because I love backpacks so much, I've decided to include it in again. For the shoulder pads, I generally tackle them as a rough shape, but because I was painting the light source from the front, I decided to paint using straight lines. I start with mapping the highlight colour using Altdorf Guard blue. I also fix up any mistakes using black and Macragge blue mix. When I'm creating the shadow on the shoulder pads, I'm only really worried about how it looks from the front. If you were to place the highlight at a different angle, I probably would use the same technique as the round shape, so an E-pad, and use more stippling rather than straight lines. I start adding Calgar blue to the part I want the brightest. I won't go into too much detail as this is the exact same method shown during the leg section. Lots and lots and lots of little lines. Many lines later, and this is what we've achieved. And I still can't help myself, so I'm just going to add more lines. Now that the armour is pretty much complete, I start working on the other parts. I start highlighting the gold using the base colour Necro Gold, and I'm trying to make sure that all the recesses are still dark. I often neglect my guns when I'm painting, but I made a special effort this time and I edge highlighted the top using Wild Rider Red. The metal parts were highlighted using the base colour again, Lead Belcher, and I'm just focusing where I want it brightest, which is just an edge highlight really, and then erase details. So here is the finished model. Thank you very much for watching this tutorial. If you have any questions or want any particular Space Marine tutorial in the future, just head over to the comments and please just let me know. If you've enjoyed this tutorial and want to see more, please drop a like and subscribe for more weekly tutorials. Until next time, take care.